Well guys, I was down here the other night and the memory card on the camera filled up, so I had to quit. But the last thing I did before I went up for the night was I took the old spindle here and I found out that the old spindle slides right up inside no problem. So that doesn't really prove anything. This still looks like it's the same size as on the new one. But it could be that because this spindle isn't captive in the quill, that when I'm putting this up, it may be off center a little bit. And it might be that when I'm trying to put it in with the quill is keeping it in position and it's not lining up. So the end result is the only way I'm going to find out what's going on is, unfortunately, is to pull this head again, the whole top area there. So I'll start by taking the motor off and popping this top assembly here off, and then I might have to take the belt housing. That'll give me a chance to swap out those belts because that other belt looked like it was in better shape. I could compare the belts. And then we're going to see whether or not this unit is just out of alignment and causing my problem, or whether or not the new shaft is not compatible with this. If that ends up being the case, I'm going to have to swap this with the other one. But what I'm worried about is I'm worried about all the damage I saw in that other one, whether or not there's something damaged in that one that's going to make me not want to use it. And if that ends up being the case, then I'm really in for a world of hurt. Alright, I'm getting pretty good at taking this apart, unfortunately. I stuck the old spindle in through the top here, and it goes in that spline smoothly. So it almost appears that I'm on the right track. And the problem is that the spline shaft on the replacement spindle won't go up into there smoothly. That tapping is actually the end of this spline shaft hitting that top of this spline shaft. So now what I'm going to do is I think I'm going to pull the quill out, stick it in upside down, and see whether or not it goes down through these splines to the top. Because if it does, then it means my splines are a good match, and it's just an alignment issue that I haven't figured out yet. But if it doesn't want to even go down this way, then it means even though these look very similar, there's something different about them. In retrospect, I should have tried the spindle before I put it in the quill, but I thought maybe I did. Doesn't look like it matches. What a bummer. Alright, one more definitive check before I rule that the problem is definitively a mismatch. Here's the original spindle. This is the first place where the spline's got to engage when I'm pushing it up inside there. So if I can get that to slide in there, which I doubt, I'm more and more convinced that there's something wrong with this shaft. It's a little more unwieldy because it's in the quill, which is heavy. But yeah, it's close, but it's just different enough that's not going to happen. You know, one more ray of hope, and that's to clean up the end of this spindle, this shaft, and find a marred or banged area on one of the grooves that I can file. Yeah, my luck's just not that good. The shaft actually looks pretty good. I don't know if that's, depending on which way you look at it. It's great that there's no damage on the shaft, but it doesn't help my current problem. Alright, let's take a measurement. Because there are 10 splines on here, it means that pretty much you've got a spline directly across from another spline. So I should be able to get a good idea of the OD. And it looks like I'm getting 1.116. Checking a couple places. Rotate it around a couple times. For the most part, yeah, it looks like 1.116 is the going rate. Well, that seems to match. Must be the size of the grooves. 0.179. 0.181. A little wider. It's not super different, but it's different enough. Well, the good news is that even though this, when I took it apart, I could see that it was completely buggered up, welded and trashed, that the actual half it mates with doesn't look that bad. I mean, those little dogs that lock into these grooves have got to have some damage on them from just being beat to hell when this was... It looks like somebody's trying to switch this out of low range into high range while it was running maybe one too many times. But anyways, I think that's going to be a usable section that I can swap out to make this work. Alright, got the speed change unit down here in the basement under some better light. And you can see it looks pretty grungy. In fact, it's almost like a before and after. Before, after, before, after, before, after. Alright, enough of that silliness. Alright, now I flipped it over. And now, let's take the spindle assembly and test my theory, which is that this should go right in there. Yep. And yet it still doesn't fit in the other one. Now that's the good news. So, I could, theoretically, I should be able to just take that whole unit and bolt it right up top there on my machine, and problem solved. The only thing I don't like about that idea is, A, this one's filthy inside. B, I went through all the trouble of putting all brand new bearings in the other one. Well, here's how things are progressing so far. I managed to get this pulley off, which allowed me to remove this assembly here, which is the weird spanner nut that I had dealt with on the previous one. That's identical to my machine, where it's got two little set screws that actually lock that nut, and that holds on this with this gear. What's nice is that this is a separate piece, because these dogs on this right here are actually a little damaged. They're rounded on the leading edge from being slammed, having the bejesus slammed out of them by somebody improperly trying to engage this while it was running. Mine is in much better shape than this. I couldn't remember whether or not that was part of this gear, but as soon as I took it off and put the puller on it, it came apart. So that means that this gear, which doesn't have any broken teeth, is a good usable gear if somebody needs one of these gears. And this can be trashed. So now I need to take this assembly out, which I recall now that involves getting this pin right here to disengage the side of that. And if I'm not mistaken, I think there's a set screw right there, or a pin I have to drive out. Yeah, I think that's a pin I have to drive out. It's been a while since I did this. Ooh, that's the key. And what, these bearings actually sound pretty good. Maybe I could just plop this whole assembly right into mine and not deal with changing the bearings, even though I put brand new bearings in mine. And we'll see. Starters, I gotta work on getting that out. Oh yeah, okay, I remember. There's an Allen screw here that if I loosen that, it allows me to pull this whole lever out, I think. This doesn't come up far enough. I do have to knock that pin out. Well, I didn't want to bore everybody with the disassembly details, since I already did this more than once. Well, parts of it I've done more than once, as far as taking the head apart and then getting down to this level and replacing the bearings. I did this once already. So you can watch my earlier videos if you came here looking for disassembly and bearing replacement instructions on this mill. So here's my my original mill's assembly with the new bearings that I installed, which are sealed bearings. And if we spin this, it's not completely silent, but it's pretty quiet. And this one, which sounded pretty good with the assembly together, actually spins easier, but has a little more noise. And I think the reason is because these are sealed bearings and they still have all of their grease in them. And my theory is that these bearings here have lost some of their grease over time. But it still sounds pretty good. I am tempted to just put this in, because swapping this and this is pretty easy. I got this whole thing apart in less than an hour. But if I want to actually take this swap one step further and put this center spindle part right here into my new bearings, or my new bearings into this unit, now it's going to be another kettle of fish. Oh, decisions. I guess I also should look at them side by side and make sure they look like they're the same. Yeah, that's what I said about the spindles. At low speed, it's almost perfectly quiet. With this one, even at low speed, it's got a little bit of noise. I also need to clean the bore of this assembly here that I'm going to use, because it's got some rust in there. Not much, a little bit though. Oh, that's interesting. See a little bit of a design change here. There's a more pronounced bevel on this one than there is on this one, which the only purpose I could foresee for that is just to aid in reassembly. Well, that surface rust was super light. I just wiped right off. Oh, I'm looking at the wrong end. Well, guys, last night I was down here pretty late messing with this thing, and what I determined was that I kind of recall having a problem with the same problem when I was working on this unit, putting the new bearings in, and that is getting this snap ring out. The problem is the way the snap ring is in here. This gear right here is kind of in the way, so it makes it a real bear to get the snap ring pliers in here. And I've tried several times, and these cheapy snap ring pliers from Harbor Freight, they actually are a lot better than any of the other ones I've had, but they still just can't quite get the job done. What happens is they kind of get in the way of themselves. I mean, it's kind of hard to explain it, but make a long story short, I'm just so disgusted with messing around with this thing for so long and not getting it apart that now I'm leaning more towards just throwing this in. This assembly does sound pretty good. I'm looking in here through this hole, and I could see some grease that looks kind of nasty, but you know. So what that tells me is that these bearings are shielded only on one side, and that the back sides of these bearings are open to this inner area here, and that really to properly repack these bearings, I would have to take them out, clean them, pack new grease in them, and reinstall them. And that all starts with getting the snap ring out. Now I thought, well, I could put this in the press. I could press this shaft out of both of these bearings. Okay, this bearing is pressed in from this side, So it's going to go all the way down to the bottom of the board. So what would happen is if I started pressing on this, this bearing would probably start moving out of its housing. And this bearing wouldn't be able to go anywhere because the snap ring's in the way, and would therefore this shaft would start to push out. The problem is I'd be exerting excessive force on these bearings, and if I don't care about them, then you know, if I'm just going to trash them and put these bearings in, that's fine. But then I've got to take these new bearings out of here and put them in here, and then I'm going to run into the same problem I'm having over here, which is again the snap ring clearance issue. So actually there's another design change there. Not only does this have the bevel on it, but I'm looking at this. No wonder why I'm having such a hard time with this one. The wall thickness is different. This dimension from the OD here to this ID here is larger than here. Now, is that just because of the bevel? I don't think so. I actually think they, well, that's the wrong side. I'm looking at the wrong side, dummy. Never mind. No, it's the same issue. You see, getting down in there to get to that clip. It's going to be the same issue on both. Let's put this in and see if we can't get this machine to run. Got to be an improvement over a broken spindle. Well, so far so good. I was worried about whether or not this was going to fit properly in here, and it does. It's a match, seems to be. And that's working the way it should, so got that back together. Now I've got to get this, this big gear back on. As soon as I find where that fell out. Oh, actually, it's here. And now we're going to put this unit on, which again, this is the one. This is the one from the donor unit, and this is the one that was in my machine. And the one in my machine, it's got a little bit of rounded over edge there on that leading edge, but that's nothing compared to how bashed up the ones on this one are. And that's more than, again, that's more than likely, that's from trying to change from high to low range while the machine's running. I wish I had the correct spanner type of wrench for this special nut, but I don't have one that fits this. I don't think I have to get too crazy with locking that nut down, because the fact that it's got not one but two mechanisms to keep that from loosening. Alright, the next decision I have to make is whether or not I want to use this pulley or the one I took off the other machine. This pulley is just the slightest bit bent in a couple spots because I had such a hard time getting this off when I originally did this work. So when I noticed that when you spin it, it doesn't look like it doesn't run perfectly true, up and down I should say, but I think I'm going to go with that one. Just a little trap door. Just thinking to myself if I'm missing anything before I put this back up there, but I think that's it. Remember, I have to orient this cover a very precise way because of these holes. I also remember there was a bit of a trick getting this small belt around the part that engaged the special cogged pulley that this belt runs on. I think I can put this up though. Alright, and again I'm going to keep these nuts and washers not completely snugged up, so that if I want to shift this around to float the head, as they call it, I can. Okay. So at this point, I think I can try and put the spindle in. Well, duh! I just realized I just did all this work up here and forgot to change the camera angle, so it was pointing at the floor, I guess, the whole time. So anyways, to recap real quick, I got the gearbox, this high-low gear range assembly back up here. I got the spindle in. I got the rack engaged. I got my, so this is working correctly. And I just now finished putting in the quill lock and testing that, and that's working the way it should. So things are definitely looking up. I notice when I take the quill lock off, it doesn't really come back. A lot of that, I think, is just, it's kind of cool down here in the basement, and the grease in there is not, it's kind of, you know, tacky. But I did confirm that I can't really get any more spring tension than that out of this thing, so. Okay, so I've got to get now, this is where things get a little tricky. I've got to get that housing back up here, and I've got to get this intermediate belt, the low range drive belt, in position. And I'm going to do that without getting grease all over everything. So I ditched these gloves, which are greasy. But now that I've got it up here and can look at it, I can really see where I deformed that stupid pulley. The top flange here is going to bend right in here going that way, and the bottom flange, directly opposite of it pretty much, is going to bend going the other way. But this actual surface right here runs true, so I don't think I even really care. Alright, if this was on upside down, then I could tap this down. But yeah, leave it alone, Steve. Don't overthink it. Alright, if I recall correctly, the next thing that needs to go back on is the small drive belt, which I hung on something around here. Oh, no, it's right here. Guess I should compare this to the one I took out of the other machine. Oh, I think I'll leave the bulkhead open. It's November 3rd, and I can't believe how beautiful it is out today. The sun is shining. It's a beautiful fall day. Alright, so some crap on the outside of this belt. But the interior of this belt actually looks like it's in better shape than this one. This is a Goodyear. This is a Dodge Dynasync by Goodyear. This just says Goodyear. This is a PD by Goodyear. Huh, that's interesting. Part numbers look the same. Clean some of the crud off of the outside of this belt. Yeah, actually this belt was just dirty, but otherwise it looks perfect. No dry rot or cracking evidence anywhere. Oh, this is kind of like a woven belt anyways, so I don't know if you would even get that kind of thing going on. But the teeth on the inside of this belt, this cog belt, there's no damage. Whereas on that other one, I've got a few teeth that were damaged because when I was first dealing with putting this together, I was having a real hard time getting this in. And well, I'll tell you right now, what I'm going to do is get that spindle out of there because the spindle's covered with grease. Oop, that's not the lock. Lock it down out of the way. Yeah, so I had a really hard time putting this together. The first couple of times I had to take this apart and put it back together, messing with it. And at some point I damaged the edge of a couple of the teeth on this belt. It still worked, and I'm going to keep this as an emergency spare. But I'm going to go with this belt. For instance, one of the things I learned is that you got to put this belt on before you put this housing on, because there's not enough clearance to sneak that belt in there. And I think trying to do that is part of how I damaged that belt at some point. Alright, now this sucker is heavy. I'm going to wipe out this housing, even though I did clean it last time. Looks like there's some crap managed to fall in there. Whoa, whoa, whoa. I think I gotta put this, yeah. They already screwed up. Yeah, so what there is there's a cutout there, so the belt's going to be in that cutout area, and then there's a pin here that has to line up with a hole on that little cover that I just dropped in. So what I need to do now is rotate that cover over, that hole over where it's supposed to be. Oh, come on. There it is. I think I had determined that that hole actually is there for the purpose of oil from this oil cup right here to be able to. What the hell is that? Be able to drip down onto that gear as it's running. There we go. Now, if I rotate this, or move it more precisely into the right position, I should be able to start getting some of these screws back in. Put the screws for the top part separate from the screws for the belt guard, but I don't remember which ones which ones are which. All right, hold on. Easy enough to do, just count them. 2, 4, 6, 7 versus 2, 4, 6. Oh yeah, of course, this 7 and 7. These 7 are a little longer than these 7. These screws have to go through a pretty thick section of casting before they even start threading into this housing, as opposed to on the top assembly. Yeah, so the top assembly gets the shorter ones. Just a little bit of wiggling and I should be able to get the first one started, and then everything else should fall into place. There we go. Alright, next thing I got to do is put that top assembly on, and the drive belt has to go in. It's going to be like on the sheave of the front pulley, and then kind of feed it in there. It gets a little tricky. But I'm going to compare the drive belt from the donor machine to my drive belt. Pick the better of the two.